Okay, hi everyone to Honeycomb Live for Five again. Nice to see you all again. And Emma, we've got Emma with us today, one of our trainers. Nice to see you, Emma. And thanks for doing this. We're going to talk about this question down the bottom today, very briefly. How can we make e-learning for consultants more effective? I think e-learning generally, outside of just consulting, e-learning gets a bit of a bad rap, I think. And I guess because there's a few poor examples of it maybe and some painful examples, but we've been using it to good effect here and there and starting to use it more in our programs. But Emma, you've been working on this a lot lately, so very keen to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I guess, especially when you're translating classroom training into e-learning, you start to notice the biggest difference is basically you're removing the people. So I know we were talking before about how do you keep that humanity? How do you keep the human side in e-learning so that it doesn't feel like you're removing the person, you're just taking the information and you're basically moving to a download of here's a load of information like a robot, and suddenly from this engaging classroom experience where everyone's talking and getting these light bulb moments, you're then to a very dry, inhuman kind of informational part. So I think that's the challenge that people often see with e-learn, and that we've talked about how do you stop that from happening? How do you bring the human connection you get in classroom-based training into the e-learning as well? And I think there's a few different ways that we can do that. One of the most obvious ways for me is about recognizing that you're moving from the spoken word to the written word. When we speak, when we talk in a very different way from how we would normally formally write professionally. And I think that's something to be aware of. When I jump into e-learns that feel difficult, feel inhuman, it's because they're written formally, they're written like a lawyer document. Have you had experience with that? What are your thoughts on kind of the way that the information is conveyed from a language perspective?
Yeah, as you were talking there, I was thinking about, I guess my poor experiences of e-learning tend to be associated with compliance type training, where the kind of thing you might have to do once a year, and it's perhaps quite technical. And yes, you have to know that stuff, but the way it is presented, I guess, as you say, particularly in written form, you start reading it and you realize you're halfway down and you haven't absorbed anything, and the language is perhaps just going straight over your head, and you're not retaining any knowledge, and actually you then end up failing the little test at the end of it, although you felt you'd read it all.
Yeah, even if you're trying, it's really impossible sometimes for it to go in. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think compliance training is a really good example, because I've seen this done brilliantly, and the way that it's been done brilliantly compared to when they kind of force you to read this text and like you can't press next, it's been at least 5 minutes because it's a long piece of text. Is when they've actually turned it into humans, and they've actually had people playing bits. And also the language, changing it from kind of this passive, it is not legal in your contract to XYZ, to active, do not do this, do this. That's one of the main ways I think that we talk differently from when we write differently, is active versus passive. And the dialogue and the conversation. So if you think of books that you've read, the engaging bits are the bits where you've got people talking to each other, because that's just naturally how our brains are much more used to interpreting language, is through spoken. So that's, I think, one just really simple tip you can do to the language and turn it more human, turn it more plain language, more engaging. One of the other things I think you can do in terms of bringing the human in is actually bringing more humans in. So you have, like in our compliance example, a load of text. So you literally just take what the human said and put it into a slide, or you can try and bring people, stories, and ideally people that the learners know. So if you've got a leader who's actually talking about that front, then you instantly got that connection to, I know there is a human here who cares about whether I'm learning this or not and thinks it's relevant to me. But there's reasons why you can bring the humans from team meetings and actually have discussions about e-learning. So find ways to just connect real humans into the e-learning. And I think that's another way that it just brings it to life. Because we know it's those discussions as well that is where a lot of learning often happens. That's very easy in a classroom setting. But when you're talking e-learning, how do you still nourish those and enable those discussions off the back of those?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really important. As you know, we're thinking about, we are starting to introduce it more into our training programs, perhaps to transfer a bit of knowledge before we start the live training itself, so we can spend more time in experiential events and exercises. And you're absolutely right. There's nothing worse. And again, I guess one of the poor experiences I've seen is where you have just an avatar that means nothing to you talking at you. You compare that to your team leader, or even better, actually, one of your peers that you know, talking about something and talking about something in an encouraging way just immediately makes a connection. So obviously relevance is super important, but yeah, seeing someone that you recognize as someone who does the job that you do, or has done it, or understands it, I think is going to make a big difference.
Exactly. You're bringing it into the real world suddenly, and it feels real and it feels relevant. And I think that relevance part is the third element that I think makes the biggest difference as well. From a human perspective, we know humans are problem-centered learners. So I had a problem, and the way that I overcome that often is I go and learn, and I take training in relation to it. And in the classroom, it's quite easy to bring that in, because you can start off the training by saying, what challenges do we have? What things are going on? And so everyone can feel that it's relevant from the beginning. In e-learning, I think we need to be a lot more explicit with that. So starting with, what are the challenges that you're going to solve? Not just what are the outcomes you're going to get, but what are the real challenges that you have right now, to again bring it into the real world. So I think those are the three things I have thought about in advance. I think are most helpful. As a recap, bring the relevance and make it explicit. Bring real humans and make real humans into the e-learning when you can. And then the third one, just don't talk like a lawyer, talk like a human in the way that we're communicating in the e-learning itself. And then finally, you get to know just real, almost as good as some of the classroom-based training, and they can really support each other, like you were saying. It creates that kind of reinforcing human connection.
Fantastic. Thanks for that summary. I think we're going to try and wrap it up now. As always, we've gone over our live for 5, but if it was live for 7, that wouldn't rhyme, would it? But thanks very much, Emma, and see you at the next one. For anyone who wants a bit more content from Honeycomb, just follow the QR code in the corner there, and you can subscribe to our content. That's all from us. Thank you.
Good. Thanks.